another episode of the Next Chapter podcast. I'm really excited to introduce you to this mother, Meghan, who I met through a networking group. So there is power in networking with other women. And so I'm very excited to introduce you to Meghan and for you to hear all about her journey. So welcome, Meghan.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm thrilled to join you here and connect with your community. It's a privilege.
Thank you. So I always like to kind of have this start at the beginning of Meghan. I know that you are a mother, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the conversation, but I like to go to learn more about Meghan, who Meghan was before a mother, before, working professional. And what did you dream of becoming when you were a little girl?
When I was a very, very little girl, I had this magical sort of imagination. So I dreamed of performing. I dreamed of animals. I dreamed of being a mermaid. It was really a very numinous type of childhood that I grew up with. And I loved, think back forever ago, Donnie and Marie. I would use anything as a microphone and just want to perform and use my voice and show off. So as a very, very little girl, that was the vibe.
I love that. And I like to start with that because it's very interesting to see how that vibe, the idea of performance and putting yourself out
Yes.
there, how that may or may not have been woven into your path. And also sometimes it's interesting for people who I work with that when they have those moments that they're stuck, that they can kind of pull back on their childhood dreams. So you had this vibe about, kind of performing, and where did that kind of take you kind of on your professional journey?
Yes. Well, it didn't. I had that very imaginative performing type of vibe. And, somewhere through my grade school years, I can also remember being really, really confident, not shy at all about beating the boys at math and stuff like that. And, I think it's very typical for girls, and especially girls in our generation, that we're going through our school years. And first of all, I think we sometimes get defined by our skill set. If you're smart, you do a certain thing, and that might not be performing. It might not be hanging out with animals or, writing. It tends you get channeled according to your skill set, and you also get impressed with the values of modesty and appropriateness. And I would say somewhere around, late elementary school, early junior high school years, those qualities really kind of faded into a little bit more people pleasing, a little bit more achievement oriented, a little bit more safe and proven path to whatever success was. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily competitive, but there was a safety and a comfort in, being um, excellent, being smart, getting the best grades I could.
That's
So
very
that
interesting.
early,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I thought that was very interesting, kind of how you spoke about the skill set and kind of how that can define you. And you spoke a little bit about
Hmm.
people pleasing and achievement and how that can get wrapped up into who you are and the path that
Yeah,
you are taking, and that's very interesting. So
yeah.
I just wanted
And the
to,
fact
kind of
of the
highlight that.
matter is, just because you're good at something or just because you have a particular strength in one area doesn't mean it's right for you necessarily. And, life teaches us that sometimes you head down a path and you have to start bushwhacking your way back to a different path.
For sure. And that is, again, very, very interesting because one path that you follow that you think is kind of either the right path or based on, like you said, the people pleasing or the skill set, can sometimes also make you feel uncomfortable because maybe it wasn't the right path. I'm not saying that that's the case for you, but that can certainly feel that way. So, kind of, how did that play out for you on your journey?
Well, I don't think I experienced the tension or the discomfort as you described it with the what I think of it as, my good on paper life, and then there is a subsequent life that wasn't necessarily good on paper, or it's fine on paper. I'm not going to say it's not good on paper, but that tension, that dissonance for me didn't crop up until I think I had kids, is when I was really aware of it. And I was working full time at a large law firm, working very hard. I was very happy to be surrounded by really committed and dedicated and smart people. And I was very proud of where I was. I'd worked really hard to get there. And then I had a baby. And I took about 6 months off as I was getting ready to go back to work. It was really, really challenging. And as luck would have it, or fate would have it, I got pregnant again right away. So I ended up extending my leave of absence. And I was very lucky that this firm allowed me to do this to 18 months.
Wow.
And it was kind of in that time that I decided that I wasn't going to go back to lawyering, at least not right then, and not in the fashion that I had been working, because I really, it was like when I had my kids, it was like somebody turned the lights on. Or in Wizard of Oz, where it's black and white, and then all of a sudden it's color.
Yeah.
You're like, this is what it's about. And I wanted to be really committed to them. And as I was talking with my law firm about coming back part-time or trying to hold on to some kind of role, I could tell I could tell that I would end up feeling compromised in both areas, that I wouldn't feel like I was doing enough at work, and I wouldn't feel like I was doing enough at home. And I wanted to be committed to the one thing, and that one thing had to be my kids. So that was my retirement. I had had 2 out of my 4 kids, and just under kind of a duress of not feeling that I could be fully focused and do a good job in both of those areas. I just picked one.
Well, that's interesting too, because I think that that is something that mothers really can kind of struggle with, that they want
Mm-hmm.
this kind of life purpose in motherhood, but then there might be some other kind of passion purpose that they have, and that real kind of balance or struggle between, am I doing one thing good enough, am I not? And then I thought that it was very interesting that you had that awareness of, this wasn't going
Yeah.
to work for me. And then it sounds like you kind of had to really pull back and check in with what your values were. And it sounds to me that your value was really being focused on your family, your children. And so, kind of, can
Well,
you
that was
speak
my
a little
mission.
bit more to that?
You know, as coaches, we do value distillation and values examinations all the time, and I wasn't consciously doing it then, but that was just in my bones. I didn't need to really think it through. Um, so from there, I ended up having 4 kids, and I will tell you, I started parenting out with the same good on paper programming that I was raised with. And it took a period of years, Andrea, before I started. A few things happened. Um, as my kids were growing into their grade school years, you could see like little tiny micro impacts. They were reflecting back to me that I was parenting them the same way that I had been parenting. And that caused me to make micro adjustments. I also had just life events happen. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2014.
Mhm.
I had got a really challenging marriage. I had to work through a lot of values around my marriage, and eventually I divorced. I lost my darling, darling dad during the same period. So there was a pocket of time where I was undergoing transformation. I wasn't looking for these transformations,
Mhm.
but I got them. And that's just a way that life teaches us. When you're under duress, your values it's like diamond making. The pressure really causes things to come together in a beautiful way. And as luck or fate would have it, during that chapter, I found a yoga class. And when I went to yoga during my lawyering days, I didn't want to breathe. I thought that was weird. I would get up and leave during Shavasana. I saw no need to lay there. And I found yoga in a much more meaningful way when I was, just confronting some challenges in life. And then I found meditation. And then I started studying and going down a rabbit hole. I started teaching, and I started getting more creative with my teaching. And then I found breath work. And then I got a coaching certificate. And everything that I do now in my work that I love so, so much. I mean, it excites me. I love the connections that I have. It all came from a time period in my life that I was not looking for, 100% not. And that that I really, adversity isn't what you ever want. It's not fun.
Hmm.
But if you have your eyes open to growth and to your intuition, then you can really make something beautiful out of it.
That is
So
so
that was my
beautifully
shift.
said.
Oh, thanks. But the good on paper, like that's where the pivot happened. And it was a very big shift to turn around. I'm not saying I did it quickly or gracefully or easily at all. But over a period of years, that's what happened.
Well, there's a lot to kind of unpack, and I want to speak a little bit more in depth about. But can you um, kind of define what you mean by good on paper? Because you've said that a couple of times, and I just want to make sure that that's very clear
Yeah.
for the listeners, because everyone can kind of define it differently. But that obviously has played a very important kind of part in your path.
Yes. Well, good on paper is your resume, and your resume is what you present to the world. And to me, good on paper is thinking of myself as a set of credentials, thinking of myself as having to impress somebody to earn a place, to be, defined by, how I slot into a profession or into a social network. It's just very external. It's externally driven by how I am seen by other people, other organizations, and not listening to my inner voice, my inner compass, my inner knowing. Because if we remove noise and we remove any kind of concern about what other people perceive about us, then that voice is there. It's always there. Some of us can listen to it more easily than others. And in my case, it took decades of my life before I was really tuning into it, but it's there.
And that's very interesting because you're right. That inner voice is always there. It's either cheering you on, or we all have that like kind of inner critic too, and trying to focus on, like you said, kind of the good on paper and how you present yourself externally. And so, can you kind of speak a little bit more to maybe how that kind of how you managed that like friction a little bit?
The
Between the good
friction
on paper,
of,
the good on paper, and then as you started to listen more in tune with your inner voice.
gosh, that's a good question. How did I manage it? It was so gradually over such a long period of time. And so I didn't really confront that friction head on. It was more like little micro adjustments over time. And I would say it was a period of about, gosh, I was diagnosed with cancer in 2014, and that was 10 years ago. So
Mhm.
I've been tiptoeing into, um, I went from being all in with my legal career to then being all in as a full-time mom and doing the co-chairing the benefits and the school board and being super, super present within a social network and my kids' school community. So I took a little bit of myself out of that at a time and poured it into um, practicing yoga, meditation, and stuff like that, my own self care. I say all the time, I am my own first client. And then I started investing a little bit more by getting teaching certificates and a coaching certificate. And that is one of my guideposts, Andrea, to this day. I have like 40 million habit trackers, and
Mhm.
I'm always keeping track of how am I investing? Am I in a coaching container right now? Am I in a workshop? Did I buy Gabor Mate's course or internal family systems? Like whatever. I That's one thing that I make as kind of a pledge to my coaching clients is I will always be practicing what I teach, and I will always be in a coaching container if I'm coaching. I think it's super important um, for my clients and also for myself.
Mhm.
So I won't say I felt a tremendous amount of friction because I was working at this so gradually. It happened kind of naturally, and I reached for things honestly because I was under duress. If my dad was sick or if I was really challenged in my divorce case, one thing I would always do is dive a little bit deeper into my own study, into my own practices, and that would always end up filtering into what I want to work on, with clients.
Well, that's important to point out that things don't necessarily happen right away, and that it
Hmm.
can, be some kind of gradual shift, but that you were listening and that you were slowly starting to tune into that inner voice and becoming more comfortable with what it was telling you. And you mentioned kind of self care. I'm curious how you define self care because every single person that I've asked has a different definition. And sometimes people's immediate response might be, more towards, oh, a massage or something like that, or nails done. But I think that it's important to understand what self care means to you, Megan.
I love that question because what I would encourage anyone to think about self care is that there is really no mold or no plan. Um, as much as I just mentioned, I have habit trackers and stuff. I think that it's really important to get up and just know what you need. Sometimes you're going to have a day, you're not going to need much. You're going to pour yourself into your work. You're going to be recording a podcast. You're going to be working on your website or whatever. And then there are days where you need to give yourself space. And self care doesn't have to be a massage. For me, self care sometimes is a walk. I think getting into nature is some of the most powerful self care there is. And it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes, cold therapy is so powerful. You can make a huge difference for yourself by getting into an ice bath or diving into Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
So I think you just really need to be fluid. Sometimes you need to just turn out the lights and let your nervous system calm down.
So it
So
sounds like for
yes, I
you,
believe it's intuitive. I really think, and it's not always possible to know how to tune into your intuition. It takes a ton of practice. But I feel like self-care really, at the end of the day, if you're working on yourself, then it will be intuitive. And I'm not saying that massages and yoga classes aren't amazing and sometimes 100% necessary, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be making yourself like some decent food in the middle of the day. It can be as simple as just, walking away from what you're doing and taking some breaths.
for
So
sure,
my
it
self-care
sounds,
is
yeah.
really, really fluid.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you're listening to yourself. So for you, the definition of self care is really being in tune with yourself and what it is in that
Hmm.
moment that you need. And maybe it is a walk in nature. Maybe it is stepping away from whatever that you're doing because you feel as though it's kind of triggering you and it's not working for you. Or maybe it is, like you said, the nourishment that you need, but it really is tuning into yourself. And so, kind of along those lines, I think that it's important also to talk about what maybe some of your non negotiables are. So you feel comfortable in what you're doing and how you present yourself. So, what are some of your non negotiables, Megan?
Yeah, and you know what? First, I'll say that I'm lucky that my life is arranged right now in a way that allows me to be so in touch with my self care because I spent so many years like doing the opposite. I was beating myself up. I was excited to be working as a lawyer, but it was punishing. And the same with my kids. I hate to say that they were punishing, but there were times with 4 kids and, doing a gajillion things where I wasn't saying no, I wasn't setting boundaries for myself, and it was punishing. So, um, patience is something, patience with yourself, learning how to set that up for yourself. Um, you need to give yourself that. And then the question of what are my non negotiables? I feel like my kids, even though they're young adults and teenagers now, they are my non negotiables, even more so in a way, Andrea, than when they were younger. I was doing a lot of administration of them, of their lives when they were younger. I was doing
Mhm.
hands on and food prep and driving and all of that stuff. But right now, the way I prioritize them and my connection to them, which is also part of my values and self-care, is I drove my 16-year-old to school today. And the days when I'll be doing that are so few and far between. There aren't many left. I left my phone at home. I refuse to compromise a minute of the time I had with them. My phone's on airplane mode. If he's eating in my kitchen, I'm fully focused on him. So my non-negotiable right now, it's my connection to my kids and rediscovering how rich that can be. Because when they're younger, it's easy to get swept up in the noise.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the beautiful things, as much as you miss your kids when they're launching into early adulthood, is that the noise goes away and you can uncover like how much you really think they're amazing people. They're so enjoyable when you
Right.
get to know them without all of the chaos that comes with having, young kids at home. And that's non-negotiable for me besides my kids and everything. I try to use my creative time without thinking about, like the dishwasher or the dog or whatever else. My non-negotiable is just really trying to be dedicated to whatever it is I'm doing.
It sounds like you have a real gift of trying to, like unplug and focus on whatever it is that you are focusing on and giving
Oh my God.
that
I don't
your
know if it's a
undivided
gift,
attention.
work in progress.
Yes, well, I think that that's very important to point out too, because we are all work in progress and we all are making these shifts based on what our current needs are. And as you were saying, that, having four kids when they were younger is going to take up a lot more time than, now that they are, they need your time, they need you for sure, but maybe just in a different
Hmm.
way. And so it's really
In a
kind
different way.
of for sure. Um, People pleasing. I know we talked a little bit about that. You mentioned that, but I think that that also is kind of a topic that comes up with a lot of mothers. So I want to kind of talk a little bit more about that and how that, can was a part of your life, and then if there have been any changes with that.
People pleasing has for sure been a huge part of my life. And I still find myself, I feel like probably it's rare to find a person who has the fortitude to not experience the urge to people please and to concern themselves with what other people think. But, I had a really hard time saying no to anything that would enrich my kids' lives. I had a really hard time saying no when I was working to any good opportunity because, honestly, there's value in doing things for your kids or your work, but there is a point where if you do the cost benefit analysis, you are giving something up. And, it's kind of a law of diminishing returns. The more output you're putting out there, the less reward you're getting from every effort that you're investing in. And, it was a real shift for me to go from I was a lawyer once and now I'm a yoga teacher. So the appearance aspect of that, the status aspect of that, I don't love saying it to you, honestly, but I have to admit, I got hung up on, you know, wanting to be professional, wanting to be impressive, wanting, I appreciated the status of where I had gotten. I appreciated the visibility of the kind of mother that I was. Um, and creating something new, and I'm always creating something new with the work that I'm doing and pursuing a new thread in it.
Mhm.
It's always kind of an investment in another facet of yourself. And it has been a lot of growth in my life in the last few years, and it's been an effort just to allow that to be about me and not about what it is to anybody else who is looking at me on Instagram or LinkedIn or in my community. Um, but it is something that I have to admit I call myself a recovering people pleaser because it trips me up and it's just something that I think I need to be aware of.
Well, I think that a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of us are people pleasers. We have tendencies to do that. And I think that you mentioned the awareness piece is very important too, because the more that you are aware, the more that you can kind of actively choose um, differently. And then as you were talking, there was something else that I wanted to point out as far as kind of the identity shift. And literally before we got
Mm,
onto this call, and then also the name of my program is called This Is Me. And I was listening to Demi Lovato's song, This Is Me. Have you listened to it?
I not lately. No, I can't place it.
Okay,
So
so
tell
either
me.
so it's that, or I also the This Is Me from The Greatest Showman, and really just living authentically and living to who you are, and not being afraid, and not, and kind of wiping away all that judgment and the fear of presenting yourself, because I always like to say, like, the judgment is really a lot of times like a mirror image, that if someone is judging you or you feel judged, that it's really a reflection of them and how they're feeling kind of internally. So I wanted to just kind of point that out, because that was
And I have goosebumps because I was at a workshop a couple weeks ago. I was participating in a workshop and we all shared very vulnerably. And a man came up to me afterwards and said, I want you to go home and listen to This Is Me, The Greatest Showman. And I just put it on my yoga playlist because I had that song had been kind of, I hadn't listened to it in so long. It was totally like way on the back shelf. Um, so it's so synchronistic that you just mentioned it.
it is, and that literally is, by like, that's the name of my program, This Is Me. And so when you listen to it, kind of what kind of came up for you?
You know what? A fiery spirit came up for me. And I was talking about my little girl self, that performative, that I'm not afraid to be like winning all of the math races we're doing in fourth grade. That is the feeling it brought out for me. A very fiery, use my voice type of feeling, which I love. We all need an infusion of that.
For sure. It's so fascinating how music too can be so powerful. And when you're really listening, you can
Uh,
listen to your internal voices, which is so important. And we spoke about that in the conversation, but also kind of just listening and filtering what is around you and the messaging that's around you, and how you choose to allow that to enter your body.
and Andrea, my yoga classes and my breathwork journeys, even more so. The playlist is such a huge part of the experience because it evokes emotions. And when you're in that space of my breathwork journeys in particular, I don't know the familiarity that everybody has with the type of breathwork that I teach, but it's a type of breathwork that helps you really get into your subconscious. So when you're in that space, the words that you're hearing can bring up memories, they can bring up intuition, they can bring up creativity, and they for sure bring up emotions that you can then release. Um, so music is super powerful. I agree with you 100%. And it's, I love working and carefully curating the music that accompanies the things that I do for my clients.
Yeah, well, it sounds like that, because, like you said, when you take the time for yourself, and I want you to share a little bit more about what breath work means and why that's so important, because I think as mothers, a lot of us are go, 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 do, and can, forget about ourselves, and can forget about just stopping and listening to those cues, and kind of, focusing on the autopilot. But it is so important when you stop and you tune into yourself, because look at what, kind of the beautiful path that you're now on, that it's when you take that moment
Mhm.
to kind of sit with those thoughts. So can you talk about a little bit about breath work and how that is so important for people?
Well, breath work is so powerful in so many ways. And, it can regulate your nervous system. You can work with your breath in 5 minutes or 20 minutes. But the breath work that I have been working with, I'll explain that a little bit. It's based on holotropic breathwork, which was developed back in the 70s and 80s by a psychiatrist who was researching psychedelics for their therapeutic benefits. And when he could no longer do that legally, he started working with breath work to produce the same kind of neurological pathway in your brain. So the kind of breath work that I work with is based off of that. And sometimes it's called transformational breath work, sometimes it's called neo-shamanic breath work. But what it does is its biochemistry causes what's called transient hypofrontality. It slows down your prefrontal cortex. So your thinking mind that's making lists and wondering about things gets a little bit slowed down, and your subconscious is more present and more exposed. So sometimes I use this type of breath work personally when I'm having a writer's block or creative block. It tends to just that all that imagination that's buried in your subconscious is more available to you. And when I teach it, most often it's aimed at an emotional release or healing. I taught an inner child themed breathwork journey a couple weeks ago where the music and my meditation was just going back to, all of the pain points and the triggers that we carry where we get blocked and where we sub-optimize ourselves. It's always in our childhood. So it kind of took people back, and that was a really, really powerful breathwork session. It just gets your thinking mind out of the way
Hmm.
so that you can delve into memories and emotions that you don't let yourself feel normally, and a freer level of creativity, I would say, and imagination.
Well, it's interesting because when you
Does that
said
make
the
sense?
yeah, no, definitely. Something that is kind of newer to me. I understand the power of breath, and when, just from an anxious standpoint and how it can kind of calm your
Mm-hmm.
nervous system. But I um, wasn't as fully aware of the in depth, how in depth it was. Um, but
It
there
can be.
was,
And
yeah.
breathe deeply into your belly and diaphragm, and in just a few minutes, you can really shift the state your nervous system is in. It's really powerful. So, there are multitudes of ways to work with your breath, and what I just described is just one that I've been focusing on.
That sounds fascinating. You mentioned kind of emotions and how so many of us don't sit with our emotions, and it brought up something for me. As mothers, sometimes I'm not necessarily saying that you and I do this, but just in general, mothers tend to rush over to their children when they're crying. Oh, it's going to be okay, or oh, you wanted the pink balloon but you got the red balloon, or not allowing people to sit with their emotions from a very young age. And so I can, imagine as we grow as adults, feeling that sense of, kind of discomfort that comes along with sitting with your
Mm-hmm.
emotions. But they are powerful. They tell us a lot. And it's so important to be tune into that, because that can be where you mentioned kind of where those areas that are causing either friction or causing you to feel kind of stuck, and that needs to be released.
Yes, childhood programming, we all experience it, and I think we're getting better over time. But childhood programming is kind of where, like I described my more imaginative and wilder, more performative self growing up. We have these brilliant, beautiful flames that we come into the world as, and it's almost like we're putting like blankets over that flame when we get programmed to sit still or be a good girl or let someone else go first. Um, there are so many shades of programming. But then I think that when we get to a point in midlife or earlier, hopefully, we start learning how to take care of ourselves by taking those blankets off and letting that very native and original light shine again. That's kind of the work that I hope to do with yoga and breath work in my retreats and my coaching work, is peeling back the layers.
Yes, we can wear a lot of layers. As mothers, we can wear a lot of hats, I say, or the layers, like you're
Yeah.
saying, all the external factors and things that are in experiences. can pile on, and you can carry a pretty heavy backpack, or like I like to kind of say, or how you filter life and the glasses that you're wearing, or how foggy it makes it. But as you can continue to change your glasses or take off those layers or unpack your backpack, you're right, you can see the flame that was always, the flame of light that was always
Yeah,
kind of burning inside of you, for sure. So as we're kind of
beautifully
nearing,
said.
and same to you. As we're kind of nearing the end of the conversation, I always like to ask the guests to share, either if it is something that kind of has guided you through your journey, or a lesson or something, or kind of that golden nugget that you carry with you that you can then impart to our listeners so they can add that in their back pocket, so to speak, as they
I think
continue
I
on their
just
journey.
did with the flame and the blankets that we put on top of it. I It took me a long time to give myself permission because I felt so obligated to other people my whole life, as a daughter, as a mother, as a lawyer, as a community member. Um, to give yourself a long leash, to invest in yourself, to study, to play around with possibilities in order to take some of those layers off. And you don't have to wait until your kids are grown, like, I almost did. You can do that to some extent when you're working hard and when you're raising young kids. Just give yourself a trip, give yourself a course that you want to take, and be really experimental so that you can sort of like say, oh, well, that feels like a brighter light in me. And that kind of guides you a few steps in a certain direction.
For sure. So beautifully said. I really appreciate all the golden nuggets that you've shared in our conversation, and how open you were at really letting us understand what that good on paper versus following your inner compass means, and how really tuning into your inner voice, slowing down, listening, taking the time um, to do that breath work can really help you find that internal flame and let it shine, and be able to say, this
Mm-hmm.
is me. So, to all the listeners out there, and to Meghan, thank you. And